Welcome to this video on The Imbued, from the tabletop role-playing game Hunter: The Reckoning. Hunter is one of the 3 game lines in the old World of Darkness published after the end of Wraith the Oblivion, and incorporate elements from, right down to the origins of the Imbued, from Kindred of the East and Demon Hunter X, which will be covered in other videos. Given the newness of the Imbued, both as a game and in universe, the lore behind them remains thin, so this will be sort of an overview of what the Imbued are, and where they came from, and how they function. But without further ado, let's jump right in. The origins of the Imbued are a mystery, even to them. Unlike other creatures of the World of Darkness, they have no sprawling history covering millennia, no creation myths, no golden age, and no fall from grace. No Imbued knows the truth, only the vague but overwhelming pieces of information doled out to them by the entities they know as the Messengers, or the Heralds. The truth, however, is somewhat complex. Once, in ancient times, the world was assailed by terrible and wicked demon lords. Heaven, in turn, blessed certain excellent mortals with the power to fight against the demon lords and drive them into the furthest reaches of the spiritual realm, where they languished in their own corruption. But these righteous and immortal sages, blessed by heaven, were themselves corrupted in turn, by their own arrogance, pride, boredom, and finally, the whispers of the defeated demon lords, who the sages were certain could never again pose a threat to heaven's chosen. The 10,000 immortals learned to feed from the lives of the people they ruled over, just as the very demons they had defeated, and thereby made themselves more powerful. The Lord of Heaven heard the wails and sighs of the people being tyrannized by the immortals, and in one act cast them down from his favor. Since they had chosen to mimic the demon lords, they could exist and suffer as lesser demons, ever dependent on stolen life and skulking in the dark like animals. As the immortals retreated from their destroyed palaces and temples, the Lord of Heaven turned his face away from the immortals, now demons, and the world, and commanded his ministers to do the same. In hell, the demon lords smiled. They would now hasten the turning of the Wheel of Ages to its nadir, a time when one of them would rule over all realms as a demon emperor, and turn the world into the same hells they had been confined to. And so, time marched on, the wheel continued to turn, and the world degraded from its former splendor as the Third Age gave way to the Fourth, and then to the current Fifth. The Lord of Heaven was unflinching in his judgment against creation and its people, but his servants were less harsh. The ministers turned their eyes back to the world and saw that it was full of suffering. They wondered to each other that if this was the state of the world now, then how much worse would the Sixth Age, the age of the Demon Emperor, be? The course of the Wheel of Ages could not be stopped, but just as the Demon Lord sought to hasten the coming of the Sixth Age, then perhaps the ministers of heaven could also hasten the passage of the Sixth Age and make the Demon Emperor's reign as brief as possible. Without the consent of their Lord, the ministers of heaven reached out to once again select champions from among humanity. These would not be the immortal warrior sages of the Golden Age. These new champions would remain mortal, but they would not be able to tap into the life forces of the world, nor steal it from others. Divine power had proven too great of a temptation for the immortals. These new warriors would instead draw their might from their own virtuousness and conviction, their zeal to purge the earth of the demons that infest it, their mercy in saving those worthy of salvation, and their vision to create the next Golden Age. And so, near the end of the 20th century, the ministers imbued select mortals with these powers, creating hunters as the Fifth Age screamed to a close and the age of the Demon Emperor approached. It remains to be seen if these hunters determine who will inherit the earth. The Imbued are not heroes or paragons. They are not shining paladins. They are ordinary men and women who have been shown the truth. They have peered beyond all masks and veils and codes of silence, and been made aware that their world is sick. The monsters that the messengers and heralds have allowed them to see are the sickness that they are to cure. The messengers show them the monsters, the walking dead, the bloodsuckers, the wolfmen, the witches, and the goblins. They are shown the truth, and then step forward to fight against what they have been shown. It is at this moment, the imbuing, that the hunters receive the messenger's blessings, such as they are, to fight the monsters on their own level. And such power is necessary, because the hunters will be fighting this war into and beyond the apocalypse. That's right. The imbued are expected to survive and resist a hell-on-earth post-apocalypse with demons ruling over the earth. No pressure or anything. The power of the imbued is fueled by their own conviction, their inner strength of will and drive to hunt down monsters. Conviction allows them to see monsters, a state that hunters have come to call the second sight. The second sight reveals monsters, but only that something about the thing the hunter is looking at is wrong. It can be the feeling of a chill up one's spine, a distorted vision of the monster in question, or they turn into something inhuman for the briefest of moments. Imagine just minding your own business and seeing someone's face turn into that. Clean underwear won't stay clean very long. The second sight does not tell the hunter what they are looking at, only that they are looking at something that should not be. Additionally, the second sight pierces all powers of illusion, hypnotism, domination, manipulation, hallucination, and possession. Of course, these benefits only last so long as the hunter applies conviction to them. When that stops, the hunter becomes as vulnerable as any other human. In addition to the second sight, the imbued are also blessed, or some might say cursed, with direct contact from the messengers. Of course, the messengers are beings of alien thought and overwhelming power, so the messages they bestow tend to be uncomfortable under the best of circumstances and skull-cracking migraines in others. And the message is rarely immediately understandable, as the hunter's mind is flooded with hazy images, sounds, and even smells, or cryptic phrases appearing in mundane places. The hunter might be looking at a cigarette pack when the letters melt and change into something like, "It hunts prey," or, while reading a newspaper, because people still do that, when the headline breaks apart and reassembles into the word, "unclean." This form of patronage from the messengers does not appear to be universal to the imbued. Some receive little to none of the messenger's attention, while others are simply flooded with it. Continuing in the vein of communications, the imbued share an intuitive, mystical means of conveying simple messages to one another that they have come to call the Hunter Code, or the Word. Hunter Code is a series of symbols hunters use to mark a location or to notify their own kind. The symbols are meaningless to anyone else. In fact, even when the word is left in plain sight, humans and monsters seem to go out of their way to not notice it. But some imbued have considered what might happen if the enemies managed to perceive, or even worse, crack the Hunter Code. The other means of communication that the imbued possess in their fight is the hunternet.org website. The site server, which is protected by the messengers and is technically accessible only to the imbued, was created by the user known as Witness 1. HunterNet acts as a hub for exchanging information on the hunt, things to watch out for, and coordination between hunters. Hunters are assigned usernames and instructed, under no circumstances, to dox themselves on the website, not even to other hunters. That's actually pretty sound advice in any situation. Certain hunters, such as the notorious Alleyman222, have been kicked from the site. Despite Witness 1's security and the messenger's protection, certain monsters have managed to enter, or perhaps been allowed to enter, hunternet.org to have little chats with the imbued, such as the incidents in 2000 with Ikmail and Carpenter 169. How do hunters find HunterNet? For some, the information is passed by word of mouth from fellow hunters. For others, they got on the internet, searching for information about the monsters until they ended up on HunterNet. A few were more forcefully guided to HunterNet, possibly by the messengers, as their internet searches and bookmarks all linked to HunterNet until they finally joined the site. One hunter even claimed to have woken up to their computer having turned itself on, and the HunterNet login page was open on their browser. What divides the Imbued are their proposed solutions as to how monsters are to be dealt with, and how the virtues of their lives from before the imbuing interacts with what they've seen in front of them. While there certainly aren't any official clubs or letterhead related to the camps and views of the Imbued, they broadly adhere to three virtues: zeal, mercy, and vision. The zealous look on the diseased world and are determined to destroy the sickness within it by whatever means they deem appropriate. The merciful look on the world and see that, despite its sickness, it is more important to protect and save the good than to destroy the wicked. Save those who can be, and then leave the rest to their fate. The visionaries, having realized that the world is not what they believed, end up questioning every belief and assumption, from their own to those of their fellow hunters. Virtues are, of course, not mutually exclusive. While every imbued leans towards a primary virtue, they may possess the other two in any combination, though they will never be as strong an influence over the imbued as their primary virtue. Some imbued wonder how much their virtues are their own choice as opposed to the influence of the messengers, pointing to the two lost creeds as proof that the messengers might be screwing with their minds. But more on that in a moment. As a hunter's experience and conviction grows, so too can their virtues. In fact, a hunter's virtue can exceed human understanding to a point that even other hunters might regard their righteousness as insanity. Unfortunately, that is exactly what it is. The more virtuous a hunter becomes, the greater their power becomes, but the farther away they walk from humanity. While the imbued are a relatively new phenomenon, there have been some hunters who have walked this extremist path, whose minds have become capable of engaging in the ruthless calculus necessary to wage war against the forces of darkness, who will gladly trade 100 human lives to kill a single powerful vampire or werewolf. The three virtues are further divided down into 9 creeds, 3 related to each virtue, which describe a particular imbued's philosophy or methodology for the hunt. Related to the hunter's creeds are edges, the powers that the hunters use to combat the supernatural directly. The 3 creeds of the zealous are vengeance, defense, and judgment. Avengers are the most straightforward of the creeds: see monster, kill monster, rinse and repeat. Why do monsters exist? Where do they come from? Why do they do what they do? The Avenger doesn't know or particularly care. If monsters prey on humans, they get the axe. Those who receive the call to vengeance tend to come from radical or extremist backgrounds, such as gangsters, separatists, identitarians, revolutionaries, fanatics, and even terrorists have had their eyes opened to the true enemy. Of course, the Avenger's zeal is their greatest weapon and their greatest flaw, the candle that burns twice as bright and half as long sort of thing. Likewise, the edge of vengeance is focused primarily on enhancing an Avenger's offensive capabilities, or putting a monster on the defensive. The Avenger can strengthen their attacks with conviction, blind the sight of monsters, or track monsters to continue the Avenger's relentless assault. Defenders can be as ferocious as Avengers, but they tend to restrict their ferocity to the people or things they deem worthy of their protection. Protect the family, protect the church, protect the community, protect the country. A defender rarely seeks out a fight, but when the fight comes to them, they are deadly. But some defenders' caution is occasionally interpreted as timidity, or even cowardice, which is untrue. Defenders are unwilling to become something as monstrous as their enemies. The edge of defense is primarily protective, allowing a defender to ward off weaker monsters, heal themselves or others, mark monsters for all to see, or force monsters to fight the defender before it tries to go after who or what the defender seeks to protect. Judges walk the middle path of zeal, between the recklessness of the Avenger and the reluctance of the defender. They ask 1,000 questions, of themselves, of the hunt, of their methods, and of the monsters that they hunt. But once judgment is passed, no one and nothing will stop the hunter from carrying out the sentence, which is usually death. Judges tend to be concerned not only with being even-handed in the hunt, but with justice in the cosmic sense. Does killing one monster matter? 1,000 monsters? How many deaths are called for to tip the scales of the universe back towards the good? The edge of judgment is both analytical and offensive, though its offense is primarily based on burdening an enemy rather than strengthening the hunter. Judges may use an enhanced second sight that pierces all concealments, mundane or magical. They can hold monsters still just by looking at them, or cut the monsters off from their sources of power, and may even expose all falsehoods uttered by those that they question. The three creeds of mercy are innocence, redemption, and martyrdom. The innocents are not naive, so much as they cling to a sense of normalcy and humanness. They don't see the logic in becoming monsters to fight monsters. All that means is that by the time everything is said and done, the world is just left with a worse sort of monster. An innocent tries to see and preserve the humanity in everyone, themselves, their fellow hunters, and even in the monsters that they hunt. To the innocent's way of thinking, if the messengers wanted more evil in the world, they wouldn't have created the Imbued in the first place, or given their powers to ordinary people. The edge of innocence is a mixture of stealth and defensive abilities that make it easier for other hunters to finish off monsters. An innocent may conceal themselves from the attention of monsters or expose monsters to the non-imbued, and protect themselves or others from attacks by monsters. Redeemers are the virtue of mercy in its purest sense. They seek to save life, and that requires knowing which lives can be saved and which can't. The Redeemer's first question is not who needs to be killed, but who can be saved. Then who is a little harder to save. Then who is harder still to save. And at the bottom of the list is who is simply beyond salvation. A rabid dog didn't ask to get rabies. A Redeemer will try to cure a rabid dog before they try to put it down. The same goes with monsters. The edge of redemption is a combination of defense and support abilities, making Redeemers most effective in hunter groups where heavy resistance is expected. Redeemers can frustrate the attacks of monsters by exposing them to their lost humanity, and heal the wounded. The martyrs are ready to sacrifice it all for the hunt, their money, their reputations, their lives, and even their souls, such as they might believe in. Martyrs will throw themselves into the line of fire to save one of their own. They'll push themselves to the breaking point to slay a monster. And the martyrs will complain mightily about how beautifully they suffer, but suffer they will, because it validates their existence, and because, to their minds, only their shoulders are broad enough to carry the weight. Martyrs take self-sacrifice to its most logical extreme, and end up somewhere at self-immolation. The edge of martyrdom is evenly divided between offensive and support capabilities. Martyrs may sacrifice their health for greater strength, discern the true nature of monsters, emit a force that withers monsters, or transmit some of their own skill and power to others. To most hunters, the virtue of vision has only one creed, which shares the same name as that virtue. But a handful of hunters has learned of the existence of two other creeds who share the virtue of vision: solitude and deviance. Visionaries are possessed of a relentless need to question everything. What are the imbued? Where did they come from? Why are certain people imbued and not others? Who are the messengers? What do they want? Why do the powers of the imbued differ in appearance and use? What is the true nature of monsters? And so on and so forth. But visionaries are not gadflies. Their purpose is to contribute wisdom and conscience to the hunt. Visionaries may occasionally be afflicted with tunnel vision and navel gazing, but learning the truth of what hunters are, what is expected of them, and most importantly, what they ought to do, requires keeping an open mind. The edge of the visionary grants them primarily support abilities, but very powerful ones. Visionaries have a limited capacity to look into the past and the future, to identify a particular weakness of the monsters they confront, and even merge past and present to a limited degree, effectively restoring fatally wounded hunters to full health. This brings us to the two lost creeds, solitude and deviance. Whether these imbued chose these paths, or had those paths inflicted upon them by the messengers, remains a mystery. The hermits, in contrast to the visionaries, wish that they could close their minds and keep them shut. Hermits hear the messengers, constantly, persistently, like static on an old TV turned to maximum volume, or a worm wriggling inside of their heads. And it gets even worse for the hermits when monsters are nearby, or other imbued. Hermits cannot stop the signs of the messengers from coming, resulting in what could be generously described as crippling social disorders, making it difficult for hermits to pass on the information of what they see and hear to others. The edge of solitude makes up for the hermit's difficulty in communicating with their fellow hunters directly. Hermits can cast their senses outward beyond the normal range of their bodies, project telepathic messages to other hunters, and sap the will of monsters and their allies while bolstering the will of their fellow hunters. And for the other lost creed, the waywards, the hunt is all that matters. They see the monsters everywhere, and they can't shut them out, even if they wanted to. A wayward second sight is always on. To the wayward, all that matters is to kill all of the monsters, and not just the ones that possess corpses or drink blood or change shape. Most waywards are clinically insane, but it is a laser-focused mania. There is no moral hand-wringing with the wayward. The monsters are prey, the wayward are the hunters, and the only question that remains is the fastest and easiest way to kill their prey. And if the other hunters go soft, or forget which side they're supposed to be on, the waywards can just give them a little shove in the right direction. The edge of deviance may be one of the strangest among the imbued, because it gives a wayward a certain amount of influence or even outright control over the actions of others. A wayward can forcibly activate another hunter's second sight. They can sense danger before it appears, and even drive other hunters into killing furies. Additionally, waywards can pry all truths from the lips of unwilling monsters. But the edges that hunters know about were designed for mortal bodies and mortal minds. There are powers beyond even those. The messengers learned from their first fallen heroes that excellence, and perhaps even virtue, are not enough. Power must be born only by those willing to sacrifice themselves to possess it, to not simply carry out the hunt and then return home to their ordinary lives until the next monster appears, but to become the hunt, to become a blood-drenched sword, or an arrow released at the hearts of their enemies. To those extremist imbued, whose virtue burns so hot in their spirits that it threatens to consume their flesh, a path opens to the most potent of the hunter's arsenal, edges that can inflict utter destruction on their enemies. But in exchange for this power, the hunter becomes something more, or perhaps less, than human. And that concludes this brief overview of the Imbued. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Hunter the Reckoning, at least to me, was an occidental variant on Demon Hunter X. But instead of being a wandering kung fu monster killer trained in Hokuto Shinken, you play as a normal who got tapped on the head by the messengers and pointed in the general direction of supernatural creatures. All in all, Hunter, as a game, kind of runs back and forth between CW's Supernatural and Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, with occasional side trips through Constantine and Stranger Things. Anyway, I've got more non-imbued hunter types and organizations that I want to cover, including the Arcanum, the Dauntain, the Sons of Tertullian, the She, and Strike Force Zero. Until next time.